right, Ted, you should be all set.
Okay, let's call the Operations Committee meeting of May 11th, 2020 to order. The first order of business is to review the committee minutes of the April 6th meeting. Do we have any comments or corrections on those minutes? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, Standing Building Committee comment. Anybody got anything on that? Hearing none. All right, let me see. I'm confused. The reviewer of the month is listed here as Mary, but I understand it's really Kirsten, so. Or is somebody impersonating somebody, or how does this work?
No, I think I got confused where I was assigned to May. I didn't realize that when I presented in May, I thought that meant that I thought it meant I present in May, not May's presentation in June. So I wound up talking to Linda and preparing for it earlier in the week. And then Linda said, hey, you're going to do it anyway, because I'm sure she didn't want to have to go through it again. So I'll do this month, and I believe Mary's going to take next month. Is that right, Mary? I don't see Mary.
I don't think Mary's here
All
yet,
right,
but
Mary's not here.
that's
So I guess
great.
then I
Thank
will
you.
do it since
Comes a
since we
little-
don't have a Mary at the moment.
Thank you, Kristen.
Okay. So expenditures for April were $4,302,601, which is slightly lower than the same time last year. Linda's attributing that to not buying school supplies and some of the changes in special transportation, no field trips, extra athletic busing or anything like that. It's still pretty high because, of course, we're still paying all of our salaries, as we all know. So it's not dramatically different, as you may think, since we're not actually in school. Revenue for April was $3,698.85, which was for Medicaid and for pre-K tuition, which we are still expecting parents to pay. Though what I thought was really great is we are actually allowing certain parents who have been negatively affected financially to make scheduled payments as opposed to having to do one bulk payment. So I thought that was great. The rest of this is relatively self-explanatory. Nothing really jumped out at me. I don't know if anyone else wanted to talk about this, anything else on this sheet before we get to the warrant.
I think the only question that I had was just an update as to where we are with fuel.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit, and we can get to that in the warrant as well.
Okay, great.
Linda, do you want to take that, or do you want me to handle it based on what we talked about? Probably easier to just come from you, right?
Yeah, I can take it. So for the heating oil, because we're still using the buildings, we have not done anything as far as liquidating the unused gallons because we're still receiving gallons. For the diesel fuel, we do have 33,000 gallons of unused diesel fuel. And East River had delivered it right before we closed school, so the tank is full. We made a partial payment to buy off some of those gallons right before the governor did close school for the year. That payment was made in May, so it doesn't show up on these warrants. So we still have the 33,000 gallons that we're going to have to pay. And at the discounted buyout rate, it's about $60,000 roughly that we have to pay for the unused diesel fuel.
So we're still saving money against burning the fuel, but we're taking a $60,000 loss as opposed to if they purchased it back from us at the price from which we bought it.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, having paid the $60,000, do we own the diesel in the tank or not?
So we own what has already been delivered. That does not include the 33,000 gallons that we did not get delivered. The $60,000 is to pay off for the fuel that has not been delivered to us.
I see, okay.
Yeah, the-
So,
The
so how
point that
much
the-
in total do we have now in gallons wise?
Of unused,
Yeah, that we technically own.
we don't own it. We just have to pay them for it. They don't store it for us. Like they used to store it for us and we would pay a
Gotcha.
fee. They don't do that anymore. So we buy out the contract and we don't get the fuel.
Right, I'm
All
just
we-
wondering if there's a creative solution here.
We had looked into some. There was a suggestion that was made locally that we had explored, and we really don't have the opportunity to sort of, sell. So
Okay.
there are limitations on what we can do there, but we did look into it. We explored some of those options to see if we could find a better cost savings than needing to sell back to the vendor. The point about the tank being full is only that we can't ask for one more delivery before we've got nowhere else to store anymore on site without going out and buying a bunch of red cans. So at this point, we've got everything that we can hold and needed to take some of the loss. Again, it's still a savings over burning the fuel. It's
Sure.
just a shame that we're taking a loss at all on it.
Well, if we had to market, we would take a real loss, so. Okay. Can we talk about, well, you tell me when you want to talk about the arrangement with the bus company. Do you want to talk about it now, or you want to talk about it at some other point in the operations meeting?
What are you asking, Ted, about what our final negotiation on the contract was, or I'm not unclear what you're
Well, I
asking?
mean, it's not clear to me what arrangement we've made with the bus company in view of the current situation.
Oh, I'm happy to speak to that. We can do that now. So there was an executive order that was issued that particularly called out bus companies and transportation contracts and directed all school districts to enter into negotiations with your transportation provider to pay the contract. Again, it didn't call for us to pay the contract in full. It called for us to enter into negotiations with the companies so that drivers would be kept off of the unemployment rolls. We had entered into those conversations with our bus company prior to the executive order being issued. Ultimately, what happened is that, one, we are not paying for any of the ancillary trips that would have occurred outside of the contract or as a la carte items in the contract for the spring semester. So field trips and athletic events primarily, we would pay for those as additional costs in the contract. Obviously, none of those are happening. The second piece is that we negotiated to pay approximately 82% of the base rate in the contract rather than 100% of the base rate in the contract. We have received assurances from the bus company that they are keeping their drivers employed. The drivers are not being laid off, and then we are making this arrangement. Now, the drivers are continuing to receive their full base pay for the most part. So again, some of our drivers count on those extra runs, athletic runs and other components. They're not making those additional hours, but most of the drivers are continuing to draw their full base pay. I say most because most of our drivers only do AM and PM runs. A very small number of our drivers were identified as full-time. We kept those drivers on for the entire day, and they would do some of the midday transportation requirements that we had. So students who might be only attending partial day, students who aren't attending a full day of school, the mail runs or small trips within town that occur in the middle of the day. Those drivers were reduced down. They were reduced down to only the AM and PM level. But I'd say 90% of our drivers continued to draw the pay that they were always drawing. Some districts in the state came in at lower than 80% negotiations. Others came in a little bit higher. I believe the average statewide was about 80%. 83 is more than reasonable for ours because the fuel is not built in and neither is the lot. The town owns the lot that we use. So we are not passing through the cost of either the fuel or the property rental or the office rental where our company is. And so 83% seemed like a reasonable accommodation, and it's right within the ballpark of what other districts came to around the state.
What about our arrangement with our special ed transportation providers?
So we have multiple special education transportation dividers. Some of that is covered by specialty. And so those runs were built into the accommodations for the overall contract. Others, we have dealt with companies individually. Some we have stopped payment completely because we were simply contracting for individual runs here and there. We stopped that payment completely. Others, we have negotiated reasonable accommodations. They're not all within the 80% range. Some are significantly lower than that. And we are only entering into those accommodations if they can assure us that their employees are being held on in alignment and in accordance with the executive order. But there's multiple different companies and we're still chasing down some of those. Linda, is that accurate? Yep. So we're not done with all of those individual providers. Some of those are as small as they cover one run. And so remember, we bid all of the special ed transportation out individually. So it creates a bit of a potpourri working through those.
Okay,
They're all much smaller contracts.
That's helpful to know.
And the bottom line is that we have generated some degree of savings. We're, essentially 20% of the last 2 or 3 months of school off of the main contract, as well as smaller individual amounts that were generated off the special education contracts.
Okay. All right, Kristen, let's go back to you and talk about warrants.
Yeah, okay, so I'm on the summary report. A couple of noteworthy items on this first page under salaries. You'll notice that substitute teachers and tutors are actually a little bit lower now. We're not paying as many subs, obviously, and we're not paying as many tutors. So we've got a little bit of savings there. Other than that, the remainder is going to wind up being about the same, and we're not finding that we're going to be tremendously below budget here at all. There's not going to be a huge cost savings. As you can see, we're only about a point below where we were this time last year anyway. Other noteworthy items under benefits, workman's comp. You'll notice this April expenditure of $12,371. This is the final, or we've already paid 4 installments on this. And then this is the last little bit that was an overage. The amount that was estimated actually accounted for 10,000 of that 12,000 number. So we're really only over by about 2,300 on that. So then you can see that under the available balance where we're a little bit behind there, but that will wind up rectified and standing as such for the rest of the year. Okay. Any questions or comments on the first page of the summary? Okay, purchased services. I don't know if you guys all knew this about E-rate and how we get money back from people who use Comcast and their internet service. That's pretty great. So under telephone and internet, we actually will be getting almost a $17,000 refund coming back to us from people who use internet through this Universal Service Fund. Linda's going to look into seeing if we can get back to using phones as well for a credit. Right now, it's just internet that we're getting a credit for, which is a discount available to schools and libraries for telecom services. Upkeep of buildings and grounds. We're a little bit over here. And I guess this number is reflective of the purchase orders, not necessarily of work completed. So I guess Cliff winds up issuing POs, but not necessarily executing against those POs. So this will actually improve. We're not entirely sure by what amount yet. Maybe by about 40,000 is Linda's guess at this point. So we're still going to be over budget there. But it will improve a bit more than the 162 that we see on this month's overage. What else? Tuition.
Wait a minute, before we get to tuition, why is electricity so high? I mean,
Linda or Cliff, you want to speak to that? Linda, you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I clicked it, it didn't unclick. Sorry, it's the payment for the energy performance contract and our actual electricity usage. So remember, the entire energy performance contract payment shows up on electricity, even though a little bit of it is under heat. It all gets rolled into the electricity line.
yeah, but I mean, it's 8 percentage points more than we were at this point last year, and there's nobody in the schools. I mean, why is that?
We're still running the schools to some extent, even though they're unoccupied. We're still running the heat at a low level. The lights are still on. We have custodians in the building. They're still working. So we haven't gone black or dark or completely off the grid with the buildings. The other thing to keep in mind is we do have another payment coming for solar. We'll offset that amount that you see there, Ted. So they're processing those reimbursement amounts, and I would speculate they should be coming in June.
Cliff,
this
even though the
is
buildings
Xerox-
are,
This is the Xerox payments?
Correct, yes.
Okay, all right.
Cliff, even though the buildings are not occupied by students and teachers, the custodians who are in fact, have been picking up, they've been continuing deep cleaning and actually picking up some project work. Is there any possibility that running the machines that they're using for project work in some locations are bigger draws than just lights and Chromebooks and classroom settings? Is there going to be an offset in that we're trying to get some work done there?
Not a huge amount in that
Okay.
aspect, Paul, but the other thing to keep in mind, the way we're operating, so normally during the summer, we'll all come together and work as a group and a crew.
Right. we
I've
can't
told
do
the
that.
guys not to do that.
Yeah, we
So
can't
I
do that.
have custodians working in every individual section. So normally we'd shut all the power off and the lights off and power down that section of the building because we're not working in it.
We're
I'm not doing that. I got all the lights on in the whole school from basically 6 to 6 because I've got custodians in there working independently in their areas. So it's
Okay.
not energy efficient, but it's the most health conscious and safe
Yeah.
way of working.
Okay.
All right. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kirsten.
Okay. So tuition. Tuition, we are still going to wind up over budget by about 150,000. We have not received all of our bills yet for some of the different schools. I guess we're having a tough time getting them to actually send us a bill. There is a little bit of savings. We've got fewer one-on-one type sessions going on. But Linda's estimate is that we're still going to wind up being over on tuition. Does anyone want to talk about tuition?
Well,
further?
can we talk a little bit about, I asked this question last month and I'm going to ask it again. I mean, these schools are very expensive, some of them for the special ed kids. And they sent the kids home. I can't believe in many cases that they're doing much in the way of distance learning. Why are we still paying them?
So I have 2 comments. One is we're going to update you a little bit more as we talk about tuition later on in the meeting. The savings is trending up. We're expecting to still be in the red, but not actually by the full 150. We're actually beginning to trend down. It's going to be closer the maybe 100,000 that were in the red at the end of the year. We are generating some savings again when the students attend those schools. If there's a one-to-one, we're saving on those costs. Jason is talking to each of the schools and he's essentially renegotiating those contracts with each of the schools. But they are continuing distance learning very much in the same way that we're continuing distance learning for all of the special education students or students with identified special needs in our school. So I do want to, you know, as we present on the one hand that we're continuing to meet the IEPs of the students that we service, I want to be respectful and recognize that those private organizations are doing everything they can to meet the needs of those students that we have being serviced from their end as well. So we are monitoring the IEPs. In some cases, we're entering into PPTs with families and with those individual providers. We're making adjustments as appropriate, but overall, we are satisfied that education is continuing and that those providers are meeting the needs of our students very much in the same way that we are meeting the needs of the students we service locally.
If I may add, I am related to someone who provides therapy through a school, much like one of our kids might go to. And she is continuing to provide therapy sessions to the students at the school she works at in remote learning. So remember that some of these costs are related to the child's mental health, and those services also continue. So that it's not just are they being educated, but are they still receiving the therapeutic services? And one can imagine it may be hard to fulfill 100% of that, but those kinds of things are still going on, I imagine, at the institutions that many of our kids are at.
And it does look different, and the burden that we're expecting of parents at home is different. You know, we've talked a number of times about how parents of high school students may be experiencing this very differently than a parent of 3 or 4 students in 4th grade and under. Parents of students with significant special needs are often being relied on more heavily than some of our other parent population. But we are confident that we're still delivering the service with the support of the parents in the home.
Okay.
Okay. Supplies and materials. A couple little noteworthy things. We are not purchasing any more textbooks, no more audio-visual equipment. So there won't be any expenditures there for the rest of the year. Under custodial, this is where we've got some increase. We're buying more masks, cleaners, and wipes. So we're up to probably already about 50,000 in additional purchases under custodial. I guess to be expected considering what's going on. And then the other thing that I thought was noteworthy on this page, site improvements. It sounds like we're going to wind up over budget here, as I understand Cliff is, now that we're officially closed, able to start some improvements, spending some additional time on improvements that maybe we're not going to get done because we had the regularly scheduled summer break, which now is extended. So I understand we're going to be able to get a few more things done. So I'm sure Cliff will fill us in on that.
That's a line that we should expect to be over expended this year. You'll see that we're going to continue to try to get project work done as available. And so we know that we will go over budget in that line this year.
Well, I mean, that's good news, because
Yes.
the only good thing you can say about school not being canceled is that it does give Cliff a longer window to get a lot of these things that he's been talking about done. And it so we should take advantage of this one in a lifetime gift and get all his maintenance guys out there and do it.
And it should be noted that Baldwin at this time is closed to any of the public under 18 years of age because we're in fact working on a project that requires asbestos abatement. And so that would not be a project that we would normally be able to complete with the school being populated. We're taking advantage of this situation to be able to get that work done. So again, for all those reasons, you'll see that line go over, and we're doing that intentionally because, as Mr. Sands says, it's an opportunity and we intend to take advantage of it.
Okay, so on to the warrant.
Sorry, can we just go back to supplies in general?
Yeah.
It does in fact, you could look at it right away and note that we're going to be under. Is there any indication, because I see that this is also going to be, a possible area where we could use to our advantage for the budget coming up. Do we know what that number is going to look like? What the savings are going to be supplies wise? Is that number going to continue to grow at all, or are we looking at an available balance of what we see now?
I would anticipate that we are going to spend some of it, usually at the end of the year. Regardless, we always do a large paper purchase. That's when they restock. I've already had a couple schools say to me that their paper supply is low. So we will be spending part of it. I don't know exactly what dollar amount at this point. We won't spend the full $173,000, but we will be spending part of it.
Okay.
There's always a balancing act at this time of year. We usually hold off on purchases like that to make sure that we can balance the year off, and you're sort of timing out a number of different things, generally balancing off what the special education shortfall is compared to some of those other overages. So we'll continue that, and Linda has gotten very, very skillful at balancing those two items. We have in past years closed $60 million budgets within $5,000 or $10,000 of zero. This year, we are adding a third concern to that balance, and it's the very reasonable concern on the side of the town and the Board of Finance about surplus. And so recognizing that schools are closed, that we've generated savings in areas like transportation, as we've already spoken of, Dr. Balistraci and Linda and I have gone on record with the Board of Finance indicating that we're projecting somewhere between a $200,000 and $250,000 surplus at the end of this year. So this year, rather than just balancing two competing factors, we are watching the special ed tuition line and how close that will close. We're looking at salaries and supplies and other lines where there's surpluses. And now we want to make sure that we are responding to the crisis in a way that is responsible and turning back to the town unused dollars that should be turned back to the town, and covering the shortfalls that we have in lines. Usually tuition is the biggest line, but other lines like site improvement will go over this year. And then finally, usually giving principals the opportunity to fill closets at the end of the year rather than opening the school year with empty closets. And so we'll do all of those. We'll just try to serve one extra master this year in addition to the normal balancing act, and make sure that we are being transparent and responsible with the town. You won't see us close to within thousands of dollars. We do expect that there will be a six-figure surplus that gets turned back to the town this year. And Cliff will still try to make sure that he gets every project he can squeezed out of this year, and principals will try to fill every closet and shelf in that closet, as they all should. And we'll keep an eye on balancing those different items this year.
Okay. Anything else before we go to the warrants?
Okay, page 1 of the warrant. Nothing looked overly strange to me. It looked pretty typical. You'll just note on the bottom, we did receive a donation of cloth face masks that we can wash and reuse.
Excuse me, Kristen, sorry. It wasn't a donation. We paid somebody for making us cloth masks. Just wanted to clarify that, sorry.
Okay. And then on page 2, we talked about transportation a little bit. I wanted to bring this up again, just to touch on the March 20th section. If you look down near the bottom of page 2, you'll see a number of invoice dates for 4/22. Those, correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, the check did not go out yet for those. This is for our out-of-district transportation. And Linda's working on further negotiating a discount amount that is improved. This is what I understand to be about reflective about a 47% discount. No, it's about a 47% total of what we owe, and we're going to try to get that down to about 40%. Is that right, Linda?
Yes, that's right. I'm hearing from other districts that this vendor has negotiated discounts as low as, or rates down as low as 40% of their regular rates. So I want to get ours down lower. So we did not issue this check to them. We voided it. We paid the other part of it, which is for the actual transportation for the beginning of March. And we are going to renegotiate the rest of those invoices.
And you see the difference there between some of the small individual vendors and the larger bus companies, 40% compared to 82%.
I just got a little pizza delivery from my daughter. Thanks, Lil. Okay, so that was it that I saw on page 2. Anyone see anything else they'd like to discuss on page 2? Okay. Page 3, this again all looked, I think the most noteworthy thing here was Eversource. We finally received bills. Linda was waiting on a number of bills. So some of these Eversource bills are reflective of 2 and 3 months. The problem, we've actually rectified the problem about receiving the invoices. So this should be fine going forward. We should not see multiple months lobbed into one anymore. Those were problems at the high school, Adams, Jones, and Lakes, and it's been rectified. So that's, I guess, why some of these are large. Anything else on page 3?
Yeah, the only thing I noted on page 3, and it also shows up again on page 7 or 6, is there an issue going on with the elevator at the high school?
Actually, it was the elevator at the old high school, so it's the side swing had an issue. So we had some
Okay,
work done on that to keep it in service.
gotcha.
Page 4, nothing in particular jumped out at me. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to discuss on page 4? Okay, page 5. Again, nothing really jumped out at me. I did ask about the 3,800 March and April 2020 reimbursement. That is, I guess, a settlement that we had to reimburse a parent for. Anything else on page 5? Okay. And page 6, we spoke already a lot about transportation, so I don't think we need to go over that again. You'll notice at the very bottom of that, another purchase for masks, which is of course new and part of why our custodial supplies are increasing. And other disinfectants on page 7. So just additional disinfectants, additional masks, those kinds of additions that we are not accustomed to seeing. But again, on page 7, nothing overly exciting jumped out at me. I don't know if anyone else sees anything else there they'd like to discuss.
On page 6, what is this Southeastern Employment Services tuition and job coaching? What's going on there?
Special ed, Linda?
Yeah, it's a special ed. It's an odd name. It's like a life skills program. it's a special ed placement where they do like job coaching and,
They develop vocational skills.
yes, thank you. I couldn't think of the other term.
Okay.
Good. Anything else from anyone? Okay,
All right.
back to you, Ted.
Okay, thank you. So the next item up is the Board of Finance edict that we reduced 200,000 from the next year's budget. And I believe we've received today something from Linda to start that discussion, but I guess, Paul, will turn this over to you.
Thank you, Ted. Yeah, so we're going to ask you in your regular meeting later this evening to take action on adjusting the budget. So the Board of Finance did reduce us by $200,000. This is possibly the only moment in time where I will tell you that it is good news that we work on our budget as early as we work on our budget. So recognizing that we would be facing reductions, one of the first things that we did was we reached out to Joe Spurgeon, who is our medical insurance consultant. The town did the same. We did this collaboratively with the town. The budget that you approved and that the Board of Finance originally approved to move forward to referendum was completed back in December. And so the medical returns, the information that Joe was working on to project our costs for next year ended around December. So we went back to Joe and asked him to revisit all of those figures with the next 3 or 4 months of information at his disposal. And we've continued to have a positive trend. So as Joe went back and reviewed those figures, we worked collaboratively with the town, but we can reduce our medical expenditure by an additional $161,000, meet the anticipated needs of next year, and cover all of our employees. Now, there's a little bit of nuance happening here. We do recognize that some of that positive trend has to do with the fact that people are not engaging in unnecessary elective procedures right now. There will be a bit of a rebound. Right now people aren't having their teeth cleaned on their 6-month calendar. So as we begin to reopen, we recognize that there will be some rebound to these numbers, but we believe it's going to be slow rebound. It's not going to be immediate that all of those missed procedures get scheduled, and some people are just going to miss a 6-month cleaning and roll into the next 12-month cleaning. So we are confident that the good news we have to offer you is that of the $200,000 reduction, we can take $161,000 of that from the medical adjustment. As I've said, the town has looked at the figures, and the town will be making up a portion of their $100,000 reduction. Similarly, I anticipate. We've then given you 2 recommendations that we would make. One is the easy option. We can simply take the $161,000 from medical, and we can take the other $39,000 from site improvement. And if we make those 2 simple adjustments, now site improvement was going up, I believe, about $55,000 this year. So it's still going up over last year. It's just going up by a much smaller number if we reduce it by $39,000. For what it's worth, whatever number we put into site improvements, Cliff's going to open with a bit of a soft freeze next year because there's a lot of unknown, and we're going to need to be careful about making facility investments until we know that we're meeting the needs of the students next year. But that is one option. And we've already talked about that we're going to run this year's budget into deficit as Cliff takes advantage of the window he has here. That's also recognizing that next year is not going to increase by the amount that we'd like to increase. Option number 2 is a little more nuanced. It is very similar in that we're going to recognize $161,000 from the medical line. We would suggest recognizing $26,000 from site improvements. Still a cut, but not as bad as $39,000. Remember that Lakes was significantly above all of the other school locations in equipment because we were looking to continue buying flexible furniture and moving in the direction that a grant from the GFFE had started us, we would suggest a pause on that we would hold those furniture purchases for another year. $3,000 reduction, not in our pension contributions, but in our actuarial fees. The monies that we've been budgeting for the actuarial fees for the pension have been over what our actual spends have been. We believe that we can make this reduction without impacting the actual contribution to the pension. We'd still be meeting the recommended contribution the actuaries are recommending this year. $3,000 reduction in general supplies. And again, we had a conversation about making every attempt to fill our closets before this year closes and rolling into next year's budget. And then a reduction in postage. We had a conversation the end of today, Anine and I were talking about shifting to electronic report cards, and there'd be a savings as we make that shift. We're making that shift out of necessity now, but we may stay in the shift to electronic report cards moving forward. And then a reduction in travel. And all of those, we think, again, we're still going to open with some soft freezes in areas like site improvement. We still don't know. Dr. Balistraci and Linda and I put the Board of Finance on notice next year, again, about all of the unknowns for next year, and that we may in fact be coming back for a supplemental appropriation. But we would recommend option number 2 to you tonight. And again, this year's budget, more than any other, is simply a projection. Right now, this is our best estimation as to what next year would look like. It was predominantly designed when things were normal. Things are not normal now. We will do our best, but I can guarantee you that whether we choose option 1 or option 2, things are going to move. There will be adjustments next year. We will need to come to you for transfers from one line to another. And if some of the big unknowns shape out in the way that some conversations are leading, we may be coming to you next year asking to support the request for a special appropriation if this budget comes up short next year. But for what it's worth, we believe that option 2 is the better choice to adjust this budget, come into alignment with what the Board of Finance has approved for us next year, and then we will talk quite a bit as next year unfolds and as we track this budget as it gets spent.
Amy, you wanted to say something?
Just a quick question. Travel, what's the travel? I know it's a tiny number, but.
It's usually for most employees, it's use of their personal vehicle within the district. Occasionally, it will cover transportation to professional development or training or sessions like that. Linda, you've got maintenance, and what was your notation there?
Maintenance and district. For the maintenance, it's the fuel that is used by the maintenance guys for the trucks that they drive in the district. And looking back, we haven't been using quite as much fuel as we had in previous years. So I think there's a little bit of between district where we don't have as many people going between buildings and the maintenance, we can reduce that by about $1,000.
We have some teachers who work across 3 or 4 different buildings. We've got a reading instructor who works across 5 buildings, all the elementaries in Baldwin. We've got a school social worker who works across 3 buildings. And then to some degree, this is travel that gets paid to those of us who are in 3 different central offices as we run back and forth. So we think that there's a reduction that we can take there, small as it is. I should have noted in the overview, we also had some extensive conversation about going into a deeper retirement savings here. If you recall, we kept a very small savings based on retirement. There was some back and forth over that. We're not recognizing the number of retirements, even the incentive for early retirement that we had put out for elementary and English language arts positions didn't fill. We didn't generate, we had put a cap of 4 in each of those certification areas. We didn't hit that cap of 4 in either of those certification areas. I just didn't feel comfortable with all of next year's unknowns and with not having a large number of retirements this year and taking anything out of salary. That's why you don't see any reduction to the salary line in any of what's proposed here.
And Paul or Ted, can you just explain to me again the actuary fees? It's not really my forte.
I'll have to defer to Linda and Ted on that as well.
No, I've asked this question before. When somebody retires that is one of our employees, somebody has to calculate what they're entitled to in their retirement. And we get a letter from the actuary that says that, and then Linda takes that letter to the pension committee, and the pension committee approves whatever it's supposed to be. And then also we pay for the actuarial study that they do every year. And if we were to ask them a question like, well, if we change the discount rate, what would the out effect be? I mean, they have to go run the numbers and come back to us. It's that sort of thing.
Hi, I have a question about if we could talk more about the site improvement reduction line. And also whether we've thought as a district about site improvements that might be related to reopening classrooms. I'm seeing online physical changes to classrooms in other countries, such as actual physical barriers that kids have around their desk area and things like that. But, just whether we've thought about whether there might be some physical changes that need to be put in place when, kids come back, to school. I know it's early, but just wondering if that conversation has come up.
It's come up on the state level. I've been part of lots of conversations about concerns around furniture. We've spent the last 20 years trying to get rid of individual desks and move to things like 2 or 3 person desks or tables. Baldwin, I believe, doesn't have a single desk in a classroom. They're all tables. So I do have concerns about if we come back under directions to keep students seated individually and at least 6 feet apart, that we would end up running into furniture costs. We haven't started having conversations, or at least I haven't been involved in conversations about creating plastic or plexiglass barriers up and down, aisles.
Have you seen what I'm talking about online?
I haven't seen them. I've heard conversations about them and they terrify me. The idea, we've
They're
worked
weird.
so hard to move away from rows and that the idea of putting literal bubbles around kids now, right? We've built a delivery system on the idea that intelligence is a social construct and that collaboration and communication are 21st century skills. So I've heard some of the conversations, Mary. I haven't looked carefully at them. And we haven't gotten to the level of talking to Cliff yet about poor Peter Diaz needing to start installing shields in front of each of those individual desks that we don't own at this time.
Well, I think that there's also issues about having to put, some sort of accommodation in the cafeteria areas to be able to serve lunches. They have tables where the kids sit down and you find a way to divide those or put the plastic in. I'm with Mary. It seems to me, we're a long way from opening and we don't know what it's going to look like, but if I had to guess, my guess is that we're going to have to spend some money to do this.
It's a good point. And the quick answer, Mary, is no. We haven't started designing or costing any of those yet. And it might simply be that I don't want to do it. And so we haven't started thinking about it yet, but we'll have to start thinking about it. It's a good point.
Yeah, that's just my thoughts as we start to think about reducing the site improvement line or changing it.
No, that's a good concern. I almost argue.
Go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say, if we take 26,000 out now and find out in 2 months that we have to invest 300 or 400,000 to make those changes. Again, it's one of those notes where I said this budget more than any other is an estimate, and there will be some significant swing that you'll experience in this budget, right? And so if we have to do that, we've only gotten so far as to start looking at numbers. Like, we know that if you wanted to load a school bus with 6-foot spacing, we could only fit 14 students on that bus compared to the 70 that most buses are rated for. And I've asked the high school to please get back to me and give me a student count for classrooms. Now, the high school classrooms come in 3 or 4 different sizes, but in general, if we tried to maintain 6-foot spacing in a classroom, what would be our maximum class size, or at least load for the day? There's been some talk about having full-size classes, but students are on some kind of alternating schedule where they're juggling in-person attendance against Zoom attendance. And so we're waiting on those numbers. So, I mean, to say we haven't started at all, we haven't started talking about an impact to Cliff's budget or to physical changes, but we have started looking at what some of that impact would mean for us. I can't tell you how large a class at the high school would look right now. I know it wouldn't be 20 kids.
I will say, as you can imagine, there was absolutely zero detail in any discussion with the Board of Finance over the last 4 weeks about this, except to the extent that I think there's some general acknowledgement, as Paul's already said, that there's a possibility that we would, in these circumstances, have to go back to the Board of Finance for an additional amount of money. And I would suggest that $26,000 or $39,000 is not a small amount of money, but it is, I can only imagine if we have to do something around social distancing, which will automatically, as far as I can imagine, include things like buses, et cetera. The number here is infinitesimally small to the number we're going to need. So Mary, I think your point is really well taken. I can't imagine that it's anywhere near what we might actually need to pull something like that off.
I agree completely. I think that we don't know what it's going to be, although we've got a lot of kind of hints that it's going to be expensive, or could be expensive. But when this comes down, and it'll come down from the state, a bunch of guidelines. And when we cost out what it's going to take to comply with those, and if we don't have that money in the budget, I think we go back to the Board of Finance and we say, here it is, guys. This is what the state's mandated us to do, and we need more money.
We should begin to have more of that information around May 20th. I know that the governor is working with a reopening committee. He has asked the 6 RESCs around the state to form regional reopening committees. Principal Michelle Hand from Melissa Jones is sitting on the LEARN committee, the regional committee that was formed down here on the shoreline. Today, I know that at 11 o'clock, there was a town hall that was hosted about reopening schools to hear from constituents, from parents around the state. We expect that some of that will begin taking shape on May 20th. But like everything that's been related to this crisis, I think this is going to be a bit of a moving target for a while. But I do think we need to start some scheduling. I don't think it should impact your decision, or some planning. I don't think it should impact, to Katie's point and Ted's point, I don't think it should impact your decision tonight. We'll make adjustments to this budget moving forward. But overall, Mary, it's a point well taken, and we need to get to work on it.
Well, let's just see if we can get a sense of at least the operations committee between option 1 and option 2. Why don't we let's do I would make a motion that we recommend to the board as a whole that we adopt option 2.
I second that motion.
How many are in favor of that?
I'm sorry, I have a question. This is a subcommittee, only 5 voting members. Would this not be better as a vote at the larger Board of Ed meeting?
Well,
We do have,
any change to the actual budget would have to be done by the full board, but I heard Mr. Sands say that the operations committee would recommend the full board, and they could certainly
Okay.
make a recommendation to you. Yep.
perfect.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. How, those in favor of selecting option number 2?
Aye.
Aye.
Those in favor of, those not in favor of selecting option number 2? Okay, so the point is that we would recommend to the board number 2. All right.
That also
good.
happens to be the one that the administration is recommending. So option number 2 will now go to the full board tonight with the recommendation of the administration and the operations committee for an up or down vote at the full board meeting tonight.
That's good. Okay.
you
Let's, having reached consensus on that, let's go to the bonding request story.
I can start that one as well. So when the Board of Finance took action on our operations budget, things being unique this year, the Board of Finance in one meeting approved the operating budgets for both the schools and the towns. They came back next week and finalized a mill rate increase as a second component of that, and also discussed our bond that had moved forward. So as part of our overall budget package, we had originally approved an operations budget, and they adjusted that by $200,000. We had also approved a $2.6 million bond request that was made up of 3 components. It was made up of a project at Lakes, an HVAC project at Lakes. It was made up of phase 2 of an HVAC project at Baldwin, and then it contained monies for future engineering and architectural expenses associated with future projects and future bids that would need to be designed. The Board of Finance asked us to review those 3 items in light of Executive Order, I believe it was 7I Section S. And 7I Section S is the executive order that gives municipalities who generally go through a referendum process the authority to not go through the regular referendum process, but to approve bonding, to approve budget requests on their authority. And the executive order separated out operational budgets and bonding requests. So they asked us to review that bonding request, and basically there were about 3 hurdles that it needed to clear. One was that we needed to argue that the items being requested in the bond were immediate in nature. We needed to identify that they were required for the health and safety of residents, or that they were required to avoid significant financial loss. When we looked at the 3 independent items, we immediately recognized that architectural and engineering fees for future projects did not meet those standards. We removed that request. That's something that we've been building in on a regular basis at the request of the Standing Building Committee, but we couldn't build it into this request. When we looked at the 2 HVAC projects, then Lakes and Baldwin, being honest, we determined that Baldwin meets all of those standards. Right now, Baldwin is halfway through the project. We're in the middle of the project moving forward. Last year, we struggled all year long to keep the band room above 65 degrees. There were days that students were playing their instruments in down coats. And remember, Baldwin failed completely a few years ago, and we had about 6 days where we weren't getting heat into the building almost at all. And if we had known it was going to be 6 days, we would have closed. But because every day we thought it was going to be better the next day, we had students attending school for over a full week in hats and gloves. And finally, Baldwin is intimately tied into the performance contract. And so for us to be able to call the work related to the performance contract done and begin seeing all of the the reimbursements and savings from that project, we need to get this Baldwin project completed. So we felt Baldwin met all of those standards. The fact is, honestly, we could not argue that the Lakes project would meet all of those standards. And one of the biggest reasons is simply timing. Even if we get the Lakes project approved tomorrow and get the bids out on the street, we won't be able to complete that work this summer. It would be preparing for the following summer. There's going to be an election in Guilford in November in one way or another. So we can tie that bond request to the election in November. We simply couldn't argue that Lakes met all those requirements in the way that Baldwin did. So we brought back to the Board of Finance that recommendation and a revised bond then. So instead of requesting 2.6 million, we'd only be requesting 1.7 million. The Baldwin portion of the bond actually increases, and it's increasing because we're going to push through and finish. We're not just going to do phase 2, we're going to do phase 2 and 3. We're going to get the whole thing completed. It also recognizes that the bids came in higher than we anticipated. Now, all of the bids came in higher than we anticipated. We've gone back and reviewed them. We feel that they're accurate, but this revised bid accounts for that, accounts for getting all of Baldwin complete, meets all those expectations. The Board of Finance's timing then is that they have scheduled a special meeting for this Thursday evening where the town will have the opportunity to comment on this project. We will make our arguments again. And then on Friday, both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance will schedule special meetings where they will vote on this bond. According to the executive order, the bond only moves forward if it passes both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. And again, we'll argue to both of those bodies that it meets all the conditions of the executive order. The Standing Building Committee has already reviewed it and already approved it in its revised fashion. They agree that it meets all the conditions of the executive order. I don't anticipate that we will have a difficulty moving this through the two boards, but that's where it stands. So just as your operating budget was changed after it was approved, this bond has been changed after it was approved. And this is where it stands at this moment in time. I'll pause and ask Katie and Cliff and Linda if I left anything out, and then we can, of course, answer any questions you have. It's been about 5 meetings at this point to try to get the budget approved and finalized after it was initially approved. And it'll be 2 or 3 more, and we'll have the bonding done as well.
Are there any other questions relating to this sorry tale of woe here?
Well, Cliff has done a ton of work on this, and Linda has been chasing this for weeks now. So I do want to make sure we thank both of them for all the time that's gone into this.
Absolutely. The Standing Building Committee has worked hard too. And,
yes, they have.
It's just unfortunate that from a legal point of view, it's turned out this way. Any other questions relating to the bonding?
I'll just add, if we heard anything from the Board of Finance, it's that they're disappointed that we're not pushing Lakes through, but I think they understand and agree that it doesn't meet the standards set forward in the executive order.
Okay. Erica, are you prepared to give us some good news?
Hi, everyone. I don't have financials, but I do have good news.
Okay.
We serve meals every day. Unfortunately, I don't have any financials. We're working on them right now with everything that's going on and the transition for serving. I will have most likely March and April relatively close to the same amount of time because they're both switching to the new seamless summer option instead of our usual school breakfast program, national school lunch program. So we're just working on updating all of that information to that new style. But I can say for the month of March, we served 12,674 meals, which is about 1,056 a day. And then for April, we served 33,794, and that's 1,126 meals per day. So we're averaging about 563 meal kits going home to students every day. And what's a big help is that we do serve 7 days. So for all of April, we were able to serve for all 30 days of the month, as opposed to our normal school schedule, which is only any school days. So we even sent food home for the holiday of Good Friday. So we were able to maximize what we're doing to the full potential of the month.
Excellent.
Erica's achieving that with a skeleton staff, honoring social distancing, continuing to meet all of the food standards that are imposed on us for food preparation. The fact that we don't have financials, I'm shocked that she's here with us tonight. It's unbelievable what Erica's pulling off with her team right now.
Thank you very much.
I think that I can completely concur. And when you get the financials, share them with Linda, and Linda will send them to the board. I mean,
Definitely.
my
We're
understanding.
working to get those done
is-
as soon as we can. It's definitely
Yeah.
a priority for me to get those all finalized. And I did just want to say for Mother's Day, happy belated Mother's Day to anyone. We did send home a cookie to all of the parents.
Well done, Erica. Well done.
Well done. Well done.
It was like, it was
I
very
had a
cute.
quick
Some of our
question.
parents seem to struggle at pickup, so we wanted to send them home something since we're always sending food home for the kids on a holiday weekend. I do have red, white, and blue cookies for Memorial Day as well. So definitely that little extra amount of flair,
Good.
but we appreciate them.
Can I
Okay.
ask a quick question? I'm just making this assumption that this program will conclude when the last day of school concludes, or have we?
So right now,
Factored
we're
in,
waiting
yeah.
for further guidance from the state of Connecticut. So there's a waiver with the USDA for the entire state of Connecticut that has extended this serving opportunity to all
Mhm.
districts like ourselves who normally don't qualify for summer or this full summer program or this seamless summer option. So right now that waiver is through until June. It does not extend beyond that. So pretty much right now we are, is it the last day of school? If the state sends out any other further guidance, I'm sure it'll go right to Paul, or if they have any extension of the program to see what our options are and could be, which we would of course look at everything that would have to get looked at for that, including extensions of contracts, there's salary, there's food costs, and a lot of financial impacts that could also be influenced into that decision if we move beyond the last day of school. But the state seems to think they might find an answer soon. They're working on summer to have some answer. If we do not serve in summer, we'll most likely revert back to what we do in a normal school, where we would send our students to a neighboring town who's got community-wide eligibility, so that any of our families would still have the services. They just would be outside of our district, but they would be full service there and able to pick up meals. Usually summer is served on a site and it's congruent and students stay there. So the state's redrafting all of those guidelines to fit into the pandemic response.
I'm just wondering with summer, since they may not be able to have those kids congregate, for lunches, if they'll have some other program, like I think it's in Branford that they do it, right? Yeah.
They do.
So
And
they'll
that's where they
have to come up with
stay.
something. Yeah.
So
Okay.
we're hoping to get guidance in the next few weeks of what their plan's going to be.
It's one more of those items where we're hoping to get guidance soon.
Sooner would be great.
Okay. Linda, do you have a tuition report?
So I don't have a prepared report for you, but as Paul mentioned before, we are now looking to be about $110,000 over budget. I did get a
Better
estimate.
than where we were 40 minutes ago.
I'm sorry.
It's better than where we were 40 minutes ago.
Yes. So there are a couple students that we know had changes. One graduated, was eligible to graduate at the end of the year, has chose to, because he was eligible, not do the distance learning and graduated early. So that saved us some money on his tuition. We have some other tuition changes, minor ones here and there. So that helped bring that down. I also did get a number for our excess cost payment for May. The final percentage looks like it came in at 70.2%. I just found out this morning this amount. So it's less than what I was originally including in my estimates, but it's a small dollar amount. It's a very minor difference from what I had. I had 72% at one point, we were estimating. So 1.8% difference in what we actually received. So we did get our final excess cost payment dollar amount.
And Linda, sorry, that's the percentage you're giving us, 70.2% is on this second payment, not overall.
So what they do is they recalculate it.
Okay,
So the first payment was based on 74%. And then they go back and we have to file in December and in March. What
right.
costs are. So when we file in December, they give us our first payment. And they give us 75% of that amount and they hold money back. And then when you do your second filing, they recalculate it and they give you the difference.
Okay. So it's 70.2 overall.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Which is a little bit less than we were hoping for, but it's almost exactly what we had budgeted, slightly less than what we had budgeted. But in light of some of those other adjustments, we're still trending in a positive direction on tuition.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Health insurance.
So I don't have a report from Mary Jane yet. As soon as I get it, I will send it out. But in talking with Joe Spurgeon and when we were reviewing the budget numbers, he did say that March claims were holding steady. They were actually, if you average out our projection for the whole year, our claims for March came in right about 1/12 of our estimate for claims. So our claims are staying very well. We do have, I believe, 7 people that have hit the stop loss. So the amount of claims covered by the stop loss went up. I don't have the report to give you the exact number. I just know some of these details from in discussions with Joe. So as soon as I get the report, I will send it out this week.
Do we have any idea of what happens if one of the people that are covered by our insurance policy, either an employee or a dependent of an employee, gets the virus and is really sick, ends up in the hospital? Do we have any estimate of how much that costs? I mean,
The
usually
max
you
it could
put
cost,
somebody in intensive care, it gets real expensive.
I think that's where our additional insurance for excess costs would come into play.
yeah, the stop loss insurance would
Stop loss, thank you.
$150,000. So our exposure is the first $150,000 of a case like that. Sorry, Paul.
No, thank you. I couldn't think of the word stop loss. Thank you very much.
Have we set the stop loss cost, insurance cost for next year? Have we reached an agreement with the carrier?
I believe we had. I think that was part
I think that was part of the,
of the cost estimate that Joe had put
Yeah.
together for. I believe it's built
Okay.
in there, but it's a good question. Can we confirm that with Joe? Jason, Linda, can we confirm that with Joe?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yes,
we
we
do
will.
That we're locked, because you're right. Let's make sure we're locked to a dollar figure for next year.
yeah,
We
I
did
just
that in
don't know what the
conjunction with the
premium is,
town,
but I
Ted.
thought we had settled. Sorry,
sorry,
Jason.
No, go ahead.
I know the premium is set. I just don't know what the exact dollar amount is. I don't remember how much, what the
Okay.
dollar we can
But
get.
I mean, it's not, because if we were to try and negotiate with them now,
Now, exactly right.
be a lot higher, because obviously they've been inundated with these kind of claims.
Yep.
Ted, we usually do that every 2 years with the town in our annual town, our meeting with the town side and Joe. I think one of the things that we talked about, and Linda, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is Anthem has been losing money on us with stop loss over the last couple of years. So we're seeing that their fees for our stop loss insurance are going up every year. So we had some discussion last year about maybe adjusting it. But I think right now, Linda, we're staying for next year at the 150 and then looking at it again at the end of next year. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Cliff, you're up.
Thanks. Just a couple things to touch on. We're still moving forward with the north parking lot at Adams. We're just about finished and we ran into a couple snags. The water line that ran underneath the parking lot failed after they turned it on. So it was in our best interest to replace the entire conduit underneath the parking lot with new conduit. So that was a change order of about $5,000 to replace all that water line. But the last thing we wanted to do was have that fail after we put the parking lot in and then have to tear it up. So we took that. The other issue we found, and we've been working with the town engineer and the Department of Public Works director on the drainage issue. So we noticed that the parking lot, extension parking lot, there's quite a runoff on that backside behind the portables. So we were actually creating a swimming pool, which is a parking lot. So that wasn't the intention. So we've worked with the engineer to redesign it. They thought it would drain naturally, but knowing that Adams was built basically on wetland and swamp, there's no place for that water level to go. So it's very slow filtering through. So they decided to add in some under drain and some additional drainage and tied into the system that actually is intertwined with the fields. So there's actually a major drainage line that comes across the fields in the back of the building. So we're going to tie into that to alleviate the drainage problem. But again, there's a change order. And again, it's a good thing that we caught it now and not after we're done paving. So we don't have to tear anything up. We still have equipment and that type of thing on scene. So unfortunately, it's a change order. It's going to be, about $14,000. It's not cheap to fix. And again, it's more in addition to work that has been done. They were hoping to do it other ways and it didn't work. So we're moving forward with that. So again, we talked about my site improvement budget. That's going to be a hit to that site improvement budget for this year. The Melissa Jones HVAC project is still moving along nicely. I did a walkthrough last week. They have just about every heat pump installed upstairs in the attic as far as sitting there. And they've removed the majority of the old ones. So they're in the process of connecting all those up. And they'll have the 2 main air handlers to finish, which will take them through probably the end of June into July to get those installed. We actually have to cut open the side of the building, bring in some cranes, move stuff in, move out the old equipment. So it's not an easy project to do, but they are moving along nicely on that. We've been updated already, obviously, from Paul and Linda on the phase 2 portion of Baldwin, where we're just obviously waiting for the bond to be approved and then the bid to be approved. So hopefully by Friday afternoon, we'll have both of those said and done. I'll be working in the next couple of days with Pam Millman from the town to actually start on the contract piece so that we can release that as soon as possible after those approvals so that I can then turn around and order the equipment because that's what takes time. So we got to get the contacts in place, get the submittals and get the equipment ordered so that we're ready to go come September 1 if we actually go back into school. The last thing we are working on that's kind of a major piece is we're doing the first school for the update and upgrades of the doors and locks. So you guys, we talked a couple months back about replacing the doors, replacing the locks to the classrooms from the hallways. So we're going to be doing the test school is Calvin Leet, and the project has been approved through the Standing Building Committee. We know we already have the funding in place from a prior bond, so that shouldn't be an issue. So it goes to the Board of Selectmen at their next meeting, I believe, which is on the 18th. So hopefully they will approve moving forward with that proposal, and we'll get those doors on order and get that project moving forward. If everything goes smoothly and the doors function correctly and we don't have any problems, then we'll start looking at doing maybe 2 to 3 schools at a time following that. So that covers all the primary projects that we're working on right now.
Cliff, you might just mention how much it's going to cost to do LEAP.
I can turn around and look. It's about $40,000 if I recall
Right.
off the top of my head, 39 and change. So $40,000 just to do LEAP.
And that's our smallest school, so.
Recall, those dollars are coming out of existing bonded monies. We're not asking for new monies to complete that work.
Correct. So the only one that might be less expensive may be Cox because it's a fully sprinkled building, and therefore the rating on the fire doors might be less, and therefore there's savings because those doors are a lot less expensive. But I'm working with the fire marshal school by school to make sure that he approves every door that we replace before we do it, because the last thing we want to do is spend all this money and find out that we don't meet code in some other aspect. So.
Okay, any questions of Cliff? Thank you. Are there any communications that need to come before the operations committee? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we're adjourned as of 7:22. See you in 8 minutes.